Hello and welcome to Gareth Icke Tonight. The Gospel of Matthew states every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. Well, yeah, that's sort of the point. A group united is more formidable as an opponent, whether that be a football team or the population of a nation. A group at odds with each other spends its time focusing on its own differences, bickering with itself, rather than uniting against the overarching enemy that wants to destroy them both. Now, when you say that out loud and you think about it calmly, it seems blatantly obvious. And yet we allow our true enemy to divide us constantly, daily. For anyone who still hasn't fathomed out who the enemies of the people are, in the not United Kingdom at least, I would point your gaze towards a large limestone structure on the banks of the River Thames, a structure that houses a very large bell. And that's just the Prime Minister. The selected officials that perform within that building openly despise the people of the nation. That's nothing new. I'm not being partisan here. They're all bastards with different coloured ties. It just seems that since the current government came to power last year, the desire to at least pretend you aren't actively ruining everybody's lives has kind of gone out the window. The government hates you and me, and they don't care who knows it. So you would think that at this point the country would be united against them. You'd think that the people would temporarily put down the fault lines they've allowed to be constructed between them, and for the sake of fighting a gaggle of tyrannical, authoritarian, warmongering Davos firsters, would leave their beef at the door, if only until such time as the war on the people has been repelled. But no. The tribalism is deep-rooted through decades, even centuries of political manipulation carried down through the generations. The tribes are instead blaming each other for the woes of the world, rather than those in the positions of power that are actively making the decisions to bring about those woes. The come-and-go politicians, with notable demonic exceptions like Tony Blair, who would bend over for Satan for free, come into the political sphere, serve their masters, which is not you, by the way, and then exit stage left into the comforts of parliamentary pensions, book deals, and well-paid corporate advisory roles. But the permanent government remains. The civil servants, the political advisors, the real decision makers, they remain in their positions, and they know the Gospel of Matthew only too well. They also know that in the last 5 years in particular, the cat has been allowed to clamber out the bag, and there's been a bit of an awakening of sorts within the consciousness of the masses. You can't stop that. It's too late. It's like trying to put a 5-man tent back into the tiny fabric bag from whence it came. Best of luck with it. But what you can do is redirect it. You can take that understanding that something isn't right, that the world isn't as people once believed it was, that there's a force or a group that seeks to destroy them, and you can turn that belief onto another group within the population rather than those that are actually running the puppet show from above. You can use that to distract the masses from their real enemy, the establishment. They've been doing that since the dawn of time. They've been taking people's eyes off the actions of themselves. Look over here while they're doing this over there. However, in a more sinister play, what you can also do with that division is not just use it to hide what you're doing, but use it to justify it, in the way 9/11 was used to justify anti-terror laws, the Patriot Act, the invasion of Iraq, of Afghanistan. Anger is already at boiling point on the streets of the United Kingdom right now. Anger at mass unfiltered immigration, anger at the injustice of two-tier policing, anger at the blatant destruction of the nation. So throw in a supposed terror attack on British soil, whether they be legitimate terrorism that's been allowed to happen, or even covert operations carried out by the state themselves, and the powder keg will blow. Civil war will erupt all around us, and that's exactly what the plan is. Recent stories about ISIS terrorists planning to attack from Somalia, which by the way is another nation on General Wesley Clark's list of countries the US wanted to invade, is about planting seeds within the public for an impending terrorist attack. An attack and the civil war that would almost certainly follow it would allow the state to impose restrictions that would make COVID lockdowns look like a week at Butlins. It would allow them to bring in emergency legislation, military checkpoints, lockdowns, curfews, mass surveillance, and ultimately the mass digital ID and digital currency rollout that they so desperately want. Terrorists use cash. We need to know who's buying what so we can stop another attack. You can just hear them saying it. The question to ask yourselves, whether you read something or hear something, whether that be from a selected official or a mainstream media, and increasingly online influencer mouthpiece, you need to ask yourself if that piece of information makes you feel angry or helpless or disillusioned or whatever, ask yourself, does the establishment gain from me feeling and acting like this? And if the answer is yes, you've been gaslit. Because the chess moves of the state only have validity and therefore control over our lives if we agree to play along, if we agree to take the bait. So for once, let's put down our tribalistic colours and unite around what we have in common. So to rewrite the Gospel of Matthew, which I'm sure is probably blasphemy, but I'm going to do it anyway. Every kingdom united within itself is brought to civilization, and every city or house united within itself will stand firm. Amen. Clare Wills-Harrison is a former lawyer who specialised in probate law and worked with elderly clients in care homes. She came to prominence after whistleblowing in 2020 about the use of the drug midazolam in those care homes, which she alleges caused harm and led to the end of her legal career due to backlash. Now, UK law, or rather the weaponisation of UK law, have been a point of contention of late, particularly in the realms of freedom of speech. Claire, it's great to speak to you. The UK is often accused of having a two-tier justice system. Notably, in the last few days, we've seen the acquittal of a Labour Party councillor who spoke publicly about slitting the throats of protesters, while someone like Lucy Connolly still sits in a jail cell for a tweet about burning a migrant hotel. You've got a theory on why this happened in the way that it did in this particular case.
Well, yeah, a couple of theories. And just to lay it out straight, I do not have a side in this debate. I'm not cheering for any political party. I'm apolitical because I do not trust any politician as far as I can throw them. And I believe that what Connolly and Jones said, total garbage, no question. But that's where my feelings stop with actually what both of them said. I don't believe either of them should have been hauled into court over their words. For me, there's zero proof that their comments made anyone go out and do something crazy. But I think the social media uproar around these cases has left me somewhat speechless, and it seems to me that much of what is being said about the cases is being framed for maximum leverage of people's confirmation and political bias, and to get people to act from emotions rather than thinking things through. So this focus on two-tier justice between the cases is, in my opinion, primarily done to exacerbate existing social tensions and divisions, and potentially undermine public trust in the justice system, which is actually a really big thing given the Leveson report on the stripping back of jury trials, which is where I think this is all potentially leading.
That's interesting, actually, in terms of the Labour Party particularly wanting to get rid of jury trials, because it's been a thought of mine for a while, Claire, with Lucy Letby. I'm of the opinion that Lucy Letby, she's a nurse who's been in prison for the killing of babies. I kind of get the feeling she's innocent, or at very least, it's a shady case, really, and I think there should be a retrial. I'm wondering, and have been for a little while, whether they'll use Lucy Letby as an excuse to get rid of jury trials. So they find her not guilty and say, look, you can't trust jury trials because, they found her guilty. It's just a thought. In terms of jury trials, though, because obviously the government's all for getting rid of them, do you think it's something that we need to fight to preserve?
Absolutely. It's part of our constitutional setup. And if you go and have a look at the Leveson report, which I think came out only recently, I think it's around 300 and odd pages. I think I made some notes somewhere about it. And it's actually a massive thing. He suggested that scrapping jury trials for some what we call either way offences, triable either way. They're the ones that can be tried in a magistrate's court, or you can opt to go to Crown Court. And he wants to strip that choice for crimes with a maximum sentence, I think it is, of 2 years or less. And instead, what's going to happen is they're going to go to magistrates or a new court setup that he suggested. And of course, this is going to affect thousands of cases. And there's an argument, isn't there, as to whether magistrates' courts in and of themselves at their heart are constitutionally defunct, because for anything that where you could suffer a loss of your liberty, I would argue that you should always be tried by a jury of your peers. He's also suggesting judge-only trials for what he calls gnarly cases, complex cases like serious fraud, a new Crown Court bench division. And he's also put some suggestions in that defendants can opt for judge-only trials, but in a Crown Court. So that would be any case, not just a complex one. If, and this is what I think is important, it even says if the defendant thinks that a jury might be biased. Now, when you consider this report and you consider these claims of two-tier justice over these two very prominent cases at the moment, the Connolly case and the Jones case, it seems a bit odd to me that this is in there, that if you think a jury would be biased, you can get a judge only, because a judge won't be biased.
What's an interesting takeaway from that, Claire, is that they don't think you need necessarily to have a jury trial if it's only 2 years imprisonment or 3 years imprisonment. It's like, well, that's a long time, actually. It doesn't sound like a long time in terms of a prison sentence when you can, compared to life imprisonment. But 2 years, there's 2 of your kids' birthdays, it's over 700 days in jail. It's a big deal. What is your hill to die on, though, Claire, in terms of our rights, in terms of our human rights? Because I know you're very vocal on your Substack and on your social media about the digital ID system.
I think a lot of the, what I call the social media kind of rage baiting posts that are going on about immigration, which these 2 cases tie into quite neatly, is a driver for digital ID as being the solution. It's the problem that's being invented, or not invented, because there are issues with immigration. It's a really complex topic and probably not something that you want to discuss now, but it's being framed in a certain way. So it's the problem to a solution that we know has already been designed, and that is digital ID or brick card, which is much more wide-ranging than the types of things that we have now, despite many people saying, oh, it's just the same. You have to, you've got a passport and you've got a driving licence. What difference does it make if it's all digital? But of course, this is all the infrastructure to hook everything up together in one central database, which eventually, of course, is likely going to then lead on to digital currency. So my issue with all of this is that where I've got a real problem is how people are allowing themselves to be manipulated emotionally about these topics. The Jones case and the Connolly case couldn't be more different. They are not the same thing, and you cannot argue that there was two-tier justice when one entered a plea of guilty and admitted intent and what she had done, and one entered a plea of not guilty and had a jury of his peers decide. Now, we don't know why the jury found Ricky Jones not guilty, and I don't want to speculate. They may have struggled with the intention part of what he was charged with and not found that he had any intention, or they might have thought that he was guilty, but as a collective, through their conscience, and this comes to jury nullification, they might actually have felt that it's wrong that we're so over-policed with our speech.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I'm sure if you're watching this, you're very much aware of the growing surveillance state emerging all around us. Whatever you do, you're being watched and your data being harvested. This is why Glenn and Eric Mader formed the Privacy Academy. Join the community designed to help overwhelmed, non-techie people like me learn how to get private online. Head over to privacyacademy.com/Icke and learn how to exit the surveillance state with regular webinars exclusively for you. Now, back to the show. That is an interesting way of looking at it, that. Maybe then this jury has acquitted him out of sympathy for Lucy Connolly because they didn't get to acquit her because it never went to a jury trial. It's an interesting way to look at it. As a bit of a segue, I guess, you became very well known in 2020 for exposing the use of midazolam in care homes. In fact, as I remember it, you were the first to do so. Now, obviously, everyone's talking about it with that, oh yeah, everyone knows that. It's like, well, no.
And you were the first person to pick it up as well.
Do you think anyone from the former government will ever be held accountable for what went on in 2020?
No. Well, not anytime soon. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, I obviously retired from the legal profession last year as a direct result of really the statements that I made in 2020, which caused me a lot of professional criticism, personal criticism, much like what I'm saying about Connolly and Jones is probably going to get me now, but I was right in 2020 and I know that I'm right about what's happening with these cases and why we're seeing the outrage that we are. I mean, I worked in the legal profession for 25 years, so I remember being really upset about the Post Office Horizon injustices and never really being able to understand why there wasn't more publicity about that, why there wasn't justice over that. And of course, what happened is ITV, I think it was, made a documentary and all of a sudden or made a drama actually, it's in the public consciousness and everyone's screaming for justice. And this is a similar, I think, situation. And what normally happens, of course, is it can take 10, 15, 20 years. And at that time, the people that were in government or in positions of power that put these policies into place are no longer in government, that some of them might be dead. The kind of emotional attachment and outrage about what happened has died down. Family members of people that were affected might not be around anymore. So there's less of a push for any kind of real justice. And of course, when we talk about justice in this way, we have to ask ourselves, even if government ministers are found to have acted unlawfully or something like that, it's often monetary compensation that is paid. So who is actually even paying for that? It's not the government ministers, it's the taxpayer. So even if you have compensation rightly going to people like the Horizon victims, it's not government that's paying for it, it's us. That's where the real two-tier justice is.
That's so true. And you find that, with the NHS, for instance, where you have, whether it be negligence or whatever, and someone says, they've sued the NHS has paid out such amount. It's like, well, not really. I paid it and you paid it. Do you know what I mean? As a taxpayer. Claire, what are you doing now? Because I'll be honest with you, it feels like a real shame, really, to not have someone of your clear moral compass involved, in the legal profession anymore.
It's actually impossible to work in that industry with a moral compass without being completely confused and battered down about why things are the way they are. And actually, I don't believe that we can ever ask this system to police itself or give us justice because we're essentially going back to a system that's set up not to provide justice properly, in my opinion. What I do at the moment is I try to explain legal concepts, legal legislation, what it means and that kind of thing via my Substack, in the hope that it will help empower people, because I think a lot of changes that we would like to see are only going to come from people being empowered themselves to understand what things mean and how they're being misused. I often speak about the weaponisation of law. I've got a couple of short kind of like report books coming out on that. And that's really what I mainly focus on, which I don't get paid for. You know, I do have paid subscribers on Substack, but not a lot. But I don't do it for that. I genuinely believe that the only way to solve a lot of the problems that we're seeing is for people to step into their own power and their own sovereignty. And they can only do that when they understand things.
I have to say, Claire, right, after October 7th, when, you know, you had this freedom movement had built throughout, you know, 2020 and beyond, and there was all these people that had come to prominence, and I had this you know, huge respect for a lot of them. And then after October 7th, a large proportion of them basically turned into lunatics. And I got to say, I was relieved when I scrolled through and I saw your social media and I saw your take on it, which was very similar to mine. I was like, oh, okay, Claire's still on side. That's great. Where can people find you? Because obviously you mentioned the Substack and obviously your social media.
The Substack's called Conscientious Currency. It was originally, when I set it up, I was going to focus more on the financial aspects and the taxation aspects of things in UK society, because when I worked as a lawyer, I worked in that area as well as with vulnerable adults, but actually it's kind of morphed into a legislation watch where I talk about bills that are coming through and what we need to look out for and commentary and all sorts of things. I've got a new piece coming out on the concepts of race and religion and how legislation deals with them, to try and help people understand more about the Connolly and the Jones cases. So that's on Substack. We've got a Telegram channel called Lawyers of Light, where we do have a few ex-lawyers, ex-police that post things on there. And obviously the Twitter account. And that's it really. I don't make myself public as I could be for many reasons, and as I say, it's not a money thing for me. I genuinely want to do it so that people do feel a bit more empowered. I totally agree with you about October the 7th. I felt exactly the same, and in fact I have a bit of a theory that a lot of the people that were allowed to come to prominence during the COVID period, the lockdown period, which, you know, were regarded as, you know, freedom advocates, and, you know, you only have to look at Laura Dodsworth as one example. I do have a theory that those people were allowed to gain the prominence that they did gain for the next narrative, the next thing that came along, to be able to steer and kind of help to frame people and keep them in a confirmation bias bubble as to what is really happening. You know, I just was so shocked about Laura Dodsworth that I think she wrote, was it the Fear book? I can't remember the name of her book. And she was the very person then that went and I think reported Bob Moran for a cartoon after, you know, October the 7th. So like you, I think all that this shows us is that, for me, when anything's really emotional, you look at COVID, it was all driven by fear. You look at what happened on October the 7th, which is obviously a highly complex issue, but it's been very turned into a very emotional thing on particular sides, making it out to be anti-Semitic, to criticise a government, to criticise a country, and it's all been mixed up. And a lot of these people that were prominent in COVID have taken part in this, and that is a real problem for me, because I can see how the framing and the social engineering is continuing via those people.
I think, Claire, you might be buying your tinfoil hats from the same shop as I am, because I agree completely. And I think it's the same in the US. You know, you have the mainstream alternative media that basically kind of came out of nowhere, really, full of people that weren't saying anything in the beginning about COVID. In fact, a lot of them were saying the opposite and were speaking out against, you know, people like yourself and people like me and others that are now suddenly, you know, leading the freedom movement. I'm sure that's not an accident. But thank you so much for joining us, Claire. It's great to talk to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
You're welcome. It's nice to talk to you, Gareth.
That's all for the free section of this week's Gareth Icke Tonight. If you would like to continue watching the episode, we have British community leader and former police officer Keith Tordoff on to discuss the current state of policing in the United Kingdom.
The government, I suspect, wants a problem, which then, obviously, as you know well, problem, reaction, solution. And we know what the solution is ultimately: more controls, facial recognition, CCTV, digital ID, all the things that are basically shouldn't happen in a free and democratic society.
And former British Transport Police Superintendent Tony Thompson is here to give us an update on the shocking miscarriage of justice surrounding Clive Freeman, a former soldier who spent 36 years in prison for a murder he insists he didn't commit.
How this was allowed to happen in the first place, because what you'll have is a man he's in his 38th year of prison for a no crime, as we'd call it in my police days. No crime was committed. So here he was. We're not looking for anybody else that may have committed a murder. We're saying that a man was in prison for nearly 38 years, or probably over 38 years by the time this reaches the Court of Appeal.
Please click the link in the description and you can head over to ickonic.com. You can subscribe instantly for just £1.99. Good night.